Stephen, welcome back.
Thank you.
Most families don't really fully grasp what nursing home care actually costs until they're already in that crisis moment. So when you sit down with a new client and talk through the real numbers, we're talking $9,000, $12,000 or more per month in Florida. What's the typical reaction that most people have?
Yeah, most people are shocked by that. They think, most people put it off. They think it's not going to happen to them. They often say, well, I'm just going to just stay at home. Or my favorite one is when they say, well, I just told my kids to take me out in the river in the boat and just throw me off. And so, well, that's murder. And you can't really do that. So that's really off the table. So a lot of people don't think about it until it hits them, and then it is quite eye-opening and shocking to them and to the family. And with not only do they have the stress of this unfortunate thing happening, or they fought the good fight at home, taking care of mom or dad or the spouse, and they finally had to wave the white flag and say, "This is too much for me. I can't do this." And so you have that burden, and then to throw the burden of nine to $12,000 per month, it's pretty devastating to people.
And you don't really have to
Mm.
spend down everything, like some people might assume. But we have this thing called the Medicaid lookback period in Florida. Can you explain what that is exactly, and what's the consequence, the real consequence? Say, if someone made a gift or a transfer to a family member in that 5 year look back period before applying to Medicaid.
Yep. So that's one of the most misunderstood pieces of Medicaid planning. So the 5-year look back period is basically the date in which you apply. Medicaid is allowed to look past the 5 years of your life to see what sort of gifts you made. Okay. So a gift is something you didn't receive anything in return or equal value in return. Okay. So for example, let's say you sold your BMW to your nephew for $3,500. Is that a gift? Well, it depends, right? If it's a 1984 BMW that's rusted out and barely runs, okay, you got just value in return. But if it's a brand new, um, 5 series and you sold for 3,500, well, then that's a gift. Okay. Or if you hired your nephew to paint your house and you paid him $10,000, well, you got something in return. You got your house painted. Okay. So that would not be a gift. Um, so it's anything that you transferred that you did not receive anything in return. So sometimes you can get caught too, like let's say you're tithing to your church. That's a gift, right? So that can be considered part of that. So then Medicaid takes all those figures, adds them up, and divides them by $10,645. Okay. So let's just make it easy. And they made a gift for $106,450. So you divide the 10,645, and that comes up with 10. Okay. So that means that once you're eligible and you've applied, Medicaid won't pay for 10 months. Okay. So the important distinction is, and why it's so important to go see, an attorney who's qualified and who understands Medicaid, is because that look back period is very important. Because if you gave that gift, let's say, 52 months ago, well, it's cheaper to pay for 8 months and then apply once you're past that period rather than having a 10-month penalty period. Okay. So that's a very, very important distinction is you need to see when you need to apply and when those gifts were made, because then you can use that strategically to make an informed decision on whether or not to apply or wait to apply. So you don't want to turn a 5-year look back period into a much larger um, penalty period.
Mm. And how often do you see that happening where you see a family come to you after they've already made a transfer and they think they were being smart by getting rid of those assets, but now they've incurred that penalty period? How often is that happening?
So that's always a fun conversation because, um, they say, "Well, I gave 150,000 to my son, and he promised he would give it back if I needed it." Great, let's give him a call. So we call the son and say, "Hey, I'm here with your parents. As you know, your dad is going to the nursing home, and remember the 150,000 they gave you? They're going to need that back." So what do you think I hear on the other line? Hear crickets, right? Well, little Bobby needed braces. The air condition went bad. That boat I always wanted. So basically, it's almost always gone. So now they're stuck in a horrible situation because now they don't have the money to pay for the nursing home, and Medicaid's not going to pay either. So that's when people are really in a pickle, and that's when it's a really bad situation because now everyone is stuck with no means to kind of get out of it.
Um, Irrevocable trusts, we've mentioned them before in previous episodes. They come up all the time, and especially in Medicaid planning conversations. When does it make sense to use one? And given that 5-year look back, what's the timing calculus a family has to think through?
So, um, so this really goes into why it's important to um, utilize an attorney who not only specializes in Medicaid, but also estate planning, have a tax background, have a real estate background, because that's often, an asset that goes into that. Because Medicaid planning is very complex and it really brings in a lot of different practice areas into its planning. So it was back in '08, '09, and that's when the world was falling apart because of the mortgage crisis. And I was thinking, there has to be a better way. We can't just rely on crisis planning for Medicaid. So that's when I went out and researched what's a better way. And it was irrevocable trust. So I ventured to guess here in Brevard County, I was probably the first one to utilize irrevocable trusts for Medicaid planning. Now, it's also important that these trusts are what's called grantor trusts. Grantor trust means that we receive a step up in basis when the client passes away, right? So we don't want to lock in taxable gains by not having it be a grantor trust. We want to make sure that when they pass away and distribute to their children, that it minimizes any sort of income tax consequences to it. Okay, so that's a big piece of it. Now, mhm, with the irrevocable trust, ideally you do it 5 years before you need it, right? But that's also we're not always able to hit that because the X factor, we can do all the planning, we can model out the income versus expenses and see how much time we have and what the assets will look like based on certain assumptions. But the one thing we can't plan for, of course, is health, right? I've had clients where we've been in the middle of the plan and the spouse calls and says, "Stop everything." We've called in the last rites, and that person didn't pass away for another year and a half. I've also had the ones that say, "Nope, they're going to live forever. They're healthy as a horse," and they pass the next month, right? So that's the part that we can't plan for is the health. So what the irrevocable trust does is it gives us our best shot at maximizing our protection with minimal tax consequences. Now, from there, we do the planning and we fund the trust. That's the important part is funding the trust because that's what starts the look back period. So if we put in $1 million, then we want to make sure that we don't apply, even if they go in the next day, for 5 years and a day because it's much cheaper that way. If they make it 4 years, well, then it becomes a math problem. When should we apply? Should we undo everything, which we build in sort of trap doors that allow us to undo everything and do crisis planning at that point? Or do we just pay for the rest of the penalty period and then apply? Okay. So it gives us a lot more options to, again, maximize protection and minimize taxes.